When do we really know a machine? It might seem like a bit of a weird question, but it is one worth thinking about. When do we really know an entirely fictional machine? Can one ever truly know it? When I first saw the Type-12 almost a decade ago, I had no way of knowing then just how familiar I would become. To me at that time, it was just another cool mecha, another cool machine. As cool as Pat Labber's Helldivers or Muvlov's Shurnui. Who really is the most familiar with machines? Is it the people who meticulously design them? The people who pilot them and use them for hour after hour? Or the people who fantasize and spend their free waking moments thinking about them? We hang posters, we save images. Ferrari, F-22, Alpha Class. These machines and our fixation on them fills our wayward time. Over the course of making The Revenge of Mecha, I spent dozens upon dozens of hours, both looking up at this mech and framing out the scenes of where it would shoot, jump, and land. In the process, I learned some things, some interesting things. Before I say goodbye one last time, before Prospero snaps his wand and sets Ariel free, I want to share at least some of them with you.
Your stickers and tiger poster with your order. Call 1-800-441-2400. You must be 18 years or older to call.
Have you wanted to live out bodacious mecha action after watching The Revenge of Mecha? Well, now you can too! The Revenge of Mecha Hmcs skinpack is available now. Fight across searing deserts, railroads and icy sunburst, hot, dangerous jungles. All of your favorite character action and lines come to life.
Chili neck.
And that's not all. The ROM Mecha Skin Pack, when combined with Drongo's APS, gives you full case upgrade package. Laugh at Kevin from down the street as his RPGs do nothing. Up new IR smokes for awesome action. Blind your friends with laser designated. The tables of death. The Revenge of Mecha Hmcs Skin Pack available now. Please download a copy of Arma 3. Requires Hmcs 12. Ask your parents before going online. No voice and action included. Also sell separately. Requires batteries. Not before 3,000 yen.
First off, let's be frank. Working with the Type-12 mod for Arma 3, the video game, was frustrating as hell. Whoa, hold on, what? Yeah, so for a few people who have no idea, I used the milsim video game Arma 3, a game largely played by people who really wished they could have joined the Marines. This game, despite my initial impressions, is incredibly fucking janky. It's weird, its physics are weird, and vehicles and their physics are especially so. And if you want to program a custom mission, like say, I don't know, in order to record them for some kind of machinima thing, you have to use freaking Boolean programming and crap. Honestly, I'm still kind of blown away this is how you have to do these things. This feels far too smart for the kinds of people who play these games, who just want, I don't know, a packed alleyway full of guys to shoot at. However, it did have a variety of locations, and a variety of modern military equipment to work with, tanks, IFVs, helicopters, ships, and you could change the times of day, alter the weather, and if not directly a part of the game by default, they could be added with mods. What is a mod? I'm sure most are familiar. Mods are a user-made content that can be added into the game by downloading and installing it. And as Arma 3 is a multiplayer-driven game for a niche of very specific people, there are a lot of specific mods to add more than the default game has. Countries, equipment, weapons, and of course, vehicles. This naturally brings me to the focus of today in this video, the Type-12. The original Gungriffon as it was imagined all those years ago existed within the limited polygonal world of the Sega Saturn. Gungriffon 1 and 2 made use of that to craft a sharp but rather believable mecha design. Of course, Takeshi Miyagi's original game was riding high on the post-Pat Labber Oshi style wave, a very grounded mecha work steeped in the contemporary geopolitics of the late 80s and early 90s. This really satisfies a weird subset of mecha fans like me. Foolish dreamers who want to bring as much real-world military logic to our mecha as possible. Like a guy who really likes Superman, but also really wants to see Superman do a basic SWAT search of an apartment or something. One other such person was Grape, a Japanese Gungriffon fan who made, from the ground up, GG Sim. GG Sim itself is kind of a fusion remake of Gungriffon 1 and 2, and Grape's efforts are what hooked me in. Combined with the fact that I could run it on my low-end laptop at the time, Its bite-sized, fast-paced mission structure meant I spent many classes blasting away Leopard 2 tanks many years ago. Gungriffon, and GG Sim by extension, familiarized me with the setting, but offered a great kind of interactive realization. Just like Zone of the Enders gave me a fun, interactive expression of so many Gundam battles I had watched, GG Sim let me play out the thermal vision autocannon world of Patlabor 2's intro I had watched over and over. So I was amazed when another fan of the series, CHKW30K, made his mod, which brought the Gungriffon I was now very familiar with into the world of Arma 3. All the pieces came together in my mind. I had the machine itself, which I knew and loved from GG Sim, a huge variety of locations, enemies, weather, time, and so on in Arma 3, issues I wanted to talk about and was already pretty passionate about for some time. And finally, CHKW30K's mod was the match that lit this whole thing off. So 2 years ago, I just started driving this thing around, plopping it onto maps and just cruising around down many roads. And the rest, well, you know how that turned out. So first off, I know this thing looks like a mech, but it's not. What? Yeah, well, it sorta is, but it also isn't. To understand what I mean, allow me to explain. Arma 3 had no built-in mechs, so making a mech, especially a mech like the Gungriffon, that can also jump and hover like a helicopter, shoot like a tank, but walk like a human, isn't easy. For an already janky physics engine like the one of Arma 3, this required CHKW30K to get creative. Now as far as I can tell, what this thing really is within the game is a really bottom-heavy, weird, invisible car. Yeah, that's right, if you don't have the ability to model balancing legs, you can sort of simulate the effect by making a very bottom-heavy, tall vehicle. This lowers the center of gravity and allows it to stand up. Honestly, this is a pretty clever idea. But hold on, Argynbolt, it can walk, right? Can't it? Well, yes and no. The walking you see in ROM is an animation played out which also moves the vehicle model's legs. However, it isn't really walking because it isn't really balancing while doing this. It just looks like it is walking. Well, in truth, the base entity is just driving forward very slowly. So the actual contact area just sort of slides forward one side at a time, not up and over and down. So to sum it up, what we see is a big cool mecha Type 12. What Arma 3 sees is this, a very bottom-heavy, H-shaped vehicle with a turret. Now there's no collision in between the feet, which is good, there's an empty space there. And that kind of led to a fun little game called Get the Rock Between the Feet, but I'll explain that in a bit. The real side effect of this is that, I don't know, it should be kind of obvious to those who can see where this is going. The Type 12 mod for Arma 3 cannot effectively step over stuff. That is to say, one of the best potential advantages for a legged machine, that being stepping over complex terrain, can't be done. Pretty funny, right? If the Hmcs or Yag moved up to a log barely half a meter tall, it can't actually step over it, because it isn't really walking, it's just driving forward with a nice animation. So instead, you end up running a lot of stuff over. This also has some other weird big consequences. Take a hill for example. Now, using real-world logic, the Type 12's wheel feet should struggle a lot with this hill, but walking shouldn't. Any wheeled vehicle, as you know, needs to either up its torque and or shift gears to climb a hill properly, as you are moving your mass against now gravity in a slope. Now this would be a great place for walking, right? You can step each foot up the hill one at a time, even incredibly amazing inclines. Elephants do this, mountain goats do this. But remember, oh no, we don't have real legs. So moving into the walking mode is just us driving forward very slowly in an invisible H-shaped bottom-heavy car while an animation plays over it. So, this hill is almost, if not exactly is, impossible to climb because we can't actually walk up it. So for most of the series, I had to fake a lot of shots with this. There was also animation jank when the walk cycle animation didn't loop quite right, and I had to edit out a lot of shots. For example, episode 6, instead of walking up the hill, I actually had to put the Hmcs into skate mode and just kind of force it up with enough thrust. Oh, and speaking of movement, boosting is no better. Arma 3's default vehicles, being based on real-life ones, obviously don't have a lot of jetpack boosters. So the Type 12's jump is very laggy and staggered at times. If you have a lot of units, doing things, getting shot and blown up, it lags even harder. So if you wonder why I didn't use a lot more dynamic jumps in the later episodes, in the big battles, It's not just because it makes the Type 12 a big target, it's because there's no way to effectively do it without it looking really janky in the process. What jumps we did do were heavily edited by myself to make it look as smooth as possible. Oh, and careful what you land on. The Type 12 should crush any trees it lands on, but Arma 3 is a weird, funky mess of a game, and this is one such example. If you land on a tree, you have to hold boost cancel to drop through, and then you'll actually land. Also, if you land on certain objects, then the animation for canceling the boost and going into landing doesn't play. So, for example, if you try to land on a building, you won't by default do that. You'll be stuck in boost mode. So you have to hold, once again, boost cancel if you actually want to come down and start moving around normally again. Oh boy, and now we get to the weapons. Things here are also very, very janky. Now, as you can clearly see, the Hmcs has a nice head with a cluster of sensors. So you think, of course, you can see from that camera, right? Well, where is the main gun on the Type 12? Oh right, it's offset in two directions. It's far lower and far to one side of the machine. Now in terms of bracing, the Type 12 120 tank gun is pretty good. We have three nice big points of contact, the right arm gripping it, the left arm with this kind of swing piece here, and the central torso brace. A lot of mecha doesn't really consider recoil that much, and so it's nice to see this amount of consideration for the kind of impact and bracing you would need to withstand firing a 120mm tank gun. However, in terms of aiming said gun, it's still a tough deal. The highest point where all the cameras are is located, well, it just doesn't line up with the bore axis of the main gun. It's on the top, not down here. In tanks, this is why you have a distinct commander and gunner optics. The commander gets the optics to see around the tank as much as possible. The gunner's main optics and sights are nicely aligned to the bore axis of the gun. However, for the Type 12, TYPE-12 decided to go with a solution where the main gunner's optics are simply offset to the left and lowered to the gun axis. What this effectively means is for aiming the gun, you're always looking where you can shoot, which is good. However, for driving, the machine has your vision skewed to the right and side of the Type 12. So taking corners can be a bit weird at first, as you need to compensate and drive the machine more like a British car. This also creates the traditional infantry issue of how to left and right hand dominant flip for a shooter trying to peek opposite corners. When you want to peek around the corner like we did in episode 8, as it's a left side corner, the Type 12 with its right side camera and gun can expose far less of the machine. Now if we try to do the same with a right hand corner, we have to basically expose the entire machine from cover. For more open terrain or forested terrain, this doesn't mean much, but for vertical cover like buildings, it biases certain cover far more than the other option for the Type 12. So it's a small detail, but a neat one. Another side effect of this is the offset that the Type 12 can't really go vertically hull down. Now what is that? Basically, tanks and other turreted vehicles can go into cover behind positions, where only the turret, the damage dealer, and the main gun is exposed. This is fairly useful. As a mech is more vertical of a vehicle, this is already pretty difficult to do. Not impossible, but more difficult for sure. The closest you get to a hold down position for a Type 12 is, as I mentioned before, a left-hand corner, like so. However, for horizontal cover, you might notice something else strange here as a side effect. The low-set gun means we can't effectively do traditional hold down. But also, because we don't see out of our head, what we end up with is a weird situation. We move up to cover we should be able to see over, but because our main camera is skewed right and down, we can't. And even if we could see over it, we can't shoot over it. So for visibility over certain cover, and because the Type 12 clearly has a head, this leads to a pretty funny situation where if you actually wanted to know where the cameras on the Arma 3 Hmcs mod look out of, it's not the head, it's actually the right shoulder. But hold on, Arkenball, the Type 12 has a mod. It has two-seater mode. Does that fix this? Where the driver maybe gets the head camera and the gunner gets the skewed gun-biased camera? Nope! The gunner controls rotate and see out of the skewed gun sight, because he needs to aim the main gun. But the driver gets, the dick camera, coming out of down here. Now don't be too harsh on THKW30K, this does kind of make a bit of sense. Because when the gunner rotates and controls the upper turret, if the driver saw out of the head, not only would the turret have to rotate to always look forward, the rather big chest armor of the Type 12, along with these shoulder pauldrons, would make a lot of blind spots. And if you're the driver, whose only job is to drive, suddenly you can't see what's directly in front of you. So yeah, ironically, either in single seat or double seat, the Type 12 has no pilot, gunner, or driver who actually sees out of its head within the Hmcs mod for Arma 3. This is why, as you might know or notice, on tanks, the driver's optics are down here, and only for the driver, while the gunner and commander optics are separate, and up here, and here. It's just kind of funny. But hold on, Argymbolt! Don't you have a super cool mod guy? Yes! But even Cannon Fodder Mark IV's best efforts only got us around, here. Basically, in real life, turning out is the practice of a vehicle crew opening the hatches and looking around to increase visibility. So Arma 3 has this feature. So when I asked Cannon Fodder if he could somehow get a head-level camera working, he tried this. Basically, add a turn-out ability to the Type 12, and have that be up here. Instead, we got another dick camera, but lower, because now we are hearing the Type 12's engine turbine from outside. So the real answer to the mystery might be that when you play this mod and get in this machine, you're actually inside the dick of the Hmcs the whole time. And moving on to another painful thing, the gun isn't really stabilized. Say what? Yeah, the Type 12's main gun isn't stabilized. What does that mean? Basically, since the mid to late Cold War, post-1970s, most/all Western tank guns have been stabilized. What this means is you aim at the target, and no matter how much your tank or ship rocks up and down, or left and right, within a certain margin, the turret will remember what you're aiming at and keep the gun lined up. Most Arma 3 vehicles have a weird stabilization, and the Type 12 as a modded-in vehicle is even weirder. So what do you have instead? Well, the Type 12's radar lock. After turning on the radar, if it's a metal vehicle, you can usually lock it. And even though every wayward pebble bumps your gun around, as long as you shoot vaguely in or near the green box, you will get a hit. This is not a great solution. It's not really a stabilized gun, it's effectively just auto-aim. So on certain vehicles like tanks, where you might want to specifically hit and even say knock out the main gun, or shoot the treads, or for example if you want to try to pop a BTR in one shot by hitting the engine, auto-locking the vehicle will instead always send the rounds center mass. This presents a situation where you are at times either aiming way too precisely, or you can't aim at all. It's a very min-maxed kind of issue. Remember that game I mentioned, Get the Rock Between the Feet? This is why. Because if you're trying to aim and lock an enemy tank while moving, and you hit a wayward pebble, your zoomed aim is thrown way off. This makes gunnery with the Type 12's main 120 a huge pain in the ass at times. It's like using a 1950s tank gun. This makes the fact that you're trying to both drive and shoot over hostile terrain and hostile enemies very difficult and very demanding. It kind of just sucks. So yeah, overall, hopefully you're now starting to get a picture of exactly how much stuff was jank and how hard it was working with this machine. Thankfully, the other weapons are not as affected. The rocket pod and missile launcher being torso mounted here make a nice military sense because that keeps them mostly enclosed and less vulnerable to enemy fire. Them also being missiles and rockets and torso mounted means they're always ready to fire so long as the torso is generally pointed at the enemy. The biggest issue is mainly that the rockets are really only situational and best used with high explosives for clearing out infantry from cover. The ATGM launcher in the Type 12 also doubles as the SAM launcher. You can choose either option. The SAMs were fine, but we did have some issues with the ATGMs. Nothing sums it up better than the final battle in Episode 9. We did a lot of takes for this battle, and the Type 12s kept losing a lot. Now this was partially us kind of slowly using better and better tactics to get it working, but it also turned out that CHKW-30K had the Yags outfitted with the meaty Trigat missile. These are full-sized European helicopter-launched tandem-charge anti-tank missiles, of which it could hotdog pack up to 8 of them. The Type 12 at most had 4, much lighter Titan missiles. The Titan in Arma 3 is based on the Israeli Spike family of missiles, of which, yes, some are on par with Trigat, but our missiles also couldn't lock air targets. This forced us to rely on the 120 main gun. Only one problem, if the target is even slightly above the Type 12 while it boosts, it can't hit it. So when the Type 12 jumps, it pivots its waist, which combined with the fact the gun is mounted on the arms, and, hitting shit in the air while moving, while the shit you're trying to hit is moving, becomes incredibly hard. So, what was your solution, Argymbolt? Oh, easy. I had cannon fodder equip the Type 12s with AGM-114Ls. Yeah, that's right, the Apache Longbow Radar Hellfire variant. This evened things out nicely. Speaking of adding additional weapons, I'm still kind of amazed how cannon fodder managed to take my caveman tier suggestion of, "Oh, grunga grunga, me want M77 artillery on Type 12 mech, ooga booga," and then make it work, and then also give it a simple to operate fire control computer. It's like magic. I have no idea how he pulled it off. The last weapon thing is, of course, yeah, the 30mm autocannon, which comes out of the barrel. This is weird. Now for Gungriffon, you only had like 30 polygons, so cutting some corners here is fine. In GG Sim, Grape's cockpit lists the machine gun as a GAU 8, which is yeah, I'm gonna say no to that one. CHKW-30K's choice of a 30mm is quite workable, but it really needed to be underslung, as there's no practical way to shove an autocannon inside a tank gun, let alone a not stupid way to even make that work. Euro Satori recently showed off a concept vehicle with 30mm reconfigured as a commander turret. I think something like that, either attached to the Type 12's main gun, or somewhere else, possibly the head, makes the most sense. Though I can understand Grape and CHKW-30K's wanting to hold true to the original Gungriffon art. The area of the effects on the round was hot garbage, but thankfully cannon fodder helped with that a lot. I have no idea if default Arma 3 30mm autocannon rounds are the shit, or if it's just a side effect of the mod, and I don't really care. The sensors and defenses of the Type 12 were also an area I retooled and cannon fodder worked very hard to fulfill. Generally, the normal vision, thermal, and night vision were all fine. We did have one issue where after episode 3, one of the bigger Arma 3 mods made night vision on infantry shit, because that's more realistic, and then for some reason by extension, probably because Arma 3 sees all night vision as the same thing, fucked up vehicular night vision optics as well. This is dumb. This is very dumb. Vehicles both have more power, space, and weight for nicer night vision optics, and as such, still basically to this day, the nicest night vision is on tanks, helicopters, and ships, etc. Arma is, however, an infantry-focused game, so I'm not surprised somebody would make this mistake. We did have one issue with the thermal vision. Episode 7's battle, taking place at night, in a storm, meant already seeing enemies was hard. What made this worse was, while some Arma 3 mods have a simple thermal brightness, where vehicles glow white from every part of the hull, others, like the tanks we used, if not turned on and idled, were basically dark gray and obscured. So we had to wait about a minute before every attempted shoot for their engines to heat them up, so we could actually see them. One major addition, which was simple, but vital, was my suggestion for a laser guidance and laser illuminator. This is included in the ROM mod. When coordinating between multiple units, illuminating the target with a laser is a great way to show exactly what you're looking at. It should also work with more ATGMs as a direct guidance, but Arma 3's abstracted missile guidance made some, like the Titan missiles, track the laser at times. Now in real life one could ask, where the hell is the radar emitting on the Type 12? And I would say, I have no idea. Locking targets is just a game logic thing that carries over here and everywhere else, regardless of what sensors are or are not present. It also gives away your position to low-flying early warning aircraft, but that's well outside the scope of things here. Personally, I just kind of feel, well, the Type 12 is big enough, it's down there somewhere. Now, the defenses of the Type 12 are weird. You have a big bank of flare and chaff launchers, and it's odd. Flare and chaff are primarily used on aircraft. Flares throw off thermal tracking missiles by confusing them with a hotter heat source away from the defending aircraft. Chaff, on the other hand, is strips of metal which reflect radar waves and act to confuse radar tracking missiles. Now both of these are good, should you be shot at by something like an air-to-air or surface-to-air missile. However, as you might have noticed, the Type 12 spends a lot of time, most of the time, on the ground. And anti-tank missiles, especially surface-to-surface or man-portable anti-tank missiles, do not use these kinds of homing methods nearly as often or at all. This meant that both of these flares and chaff were useless in a lot of situations. So one of the biggest things I pushed for was smoke launchers. IR smoke is an established, highly valuable real-world soft kill countermeasure. These rapidly create clouds of hot, dense, white phosphorus smoke, which both visibly and thermally obscure vehicles. Honestly, the mechs in the opening of TYPE-12, when they're getting shot at, shouldn't really be popping flares, they should be popping IR smoke. Especially for ground vehicles that can't quickly get out of the way, IR smoke is far more useful for creating rapid cover. For some reason as well, in Arma, which is once again a very stupid thing, smoke launchers don't work like actual smoke. They work like smoke grenades? What these do basically is slowly build up a smoke screen, yes, but they're basically what you get if you take infantry smoke grenades and you strap them to a vehicle. In real life, a smoke launcher fires a solid slug round that explodes midair to instantly obscure as fast as possible a vulnerable vehicle, especially in cases where you have a margin of error of seconds between an ATGM or a tank gun hitting you. So, once again, Arma 3 is kinda jank and bad, even by milsim standards. Now this brings us to maybe the biggest singular defensive boost I pushed for, and thankfully cannon fodder implemented: hard kill active protection. This fully rounded out the cased up combo, basically my name for the upgrade package that I thought up and Cannon implemented. Using an existing Arma 3 mod, Drongo's APS, Active Protection Systems, which had a finished number of real-life APS, Cannon Fodder added it onto the Type-12. What APS and hard kill systems are a bank of aimed, shaped explosive defensive charges. When someone fires something like an anti-tank missile at a vehicle with its APS active, a combination of sensors on the machine detect the missile, its direction, speed, and then aim and choose a launcher to then fire one of these defensive charges into the path of the projectile. The defensive charge explodes, shreds, and destroys the missile in the process. Honestly, pretty swell. And as if that wasn't great enough, it automatically fired off the chaff and flares. And at one point, we even messed around with it auto-launching smoke as well. So the Drongo mod could try to use countermeasures to avoid a missile. And if the missile still closes, it has a number of hard kill protective charges to destroy the missile as well. This honestly was fantastic. For the likes of something like the Type-12, a really tall, vertical vehicle exposed to a lot of ATGM fire, this is a massive improvement. This for me makes the Type-12 really a vehicle that was designed in the 90s, now brought to something like a 2020 level of protection. Ironically, by having a built-in radar suite, the Type-12 already has a big advantage in having one of the main sensors needed to make APS work. So altogether, while not as impressive as a big gun, a laser designator, APS with soft and hard kill options is still something I'm amazed and I can't thank Cannon Fodder enough for. It takes the Type-12 into the 21st century and I'm very proud of how it all turned out. Speaking of which, making the skins was fantastic. It was challenging in a unique artistic way, and I'm proud of how each turned out. Letting you play with them now is kind of the ultimate expression of that. I had to visually break down the machine, the environments it would be in, terrain and flora, times of day. I would then make a quick thumbnail mock-up, and then send that over to Cannon, and then he would slave at it for like a week to actually get it working. It was very challenging, but in the end, I don't need to own all the G1 Bionicles, because now I have my own personal Bionicles to remember and play with. So I think that's enough about the machine itself, and I think it'd be nice to end off with some of the things I learned and kind of thought about while making ROM, as it really was quite a massive project. When I started out, I had a really kind of clear idea. I would write a script, storyboard out each of the scenes, and then make an Arma 3 mission to kind of make each of those scenes, then record those scenes, record the dialogue, edit the recording of the scene, and then edit them together, and then finish it up, subtitle it. In practice, this was much easier said than done. Arma 3 AI is, janky? Shit? I want to say shit mainly. Herding cats is the best literal metaphor because that's really what it's like. You can point Arma 3 AI across a field, tell them to go, and then watch them go, but you can't really control where they'll all go. They will probably cross the field, and they'll even probably shoot at what you tell them to, but forget about the specifics. The only way to script out units was to literally record each unit, and then save that data to a special file. So for small scenes, this was kind of doable, but for larger battles, this would mean the equivalent of stop frame animation for each and every single unit. This, combined with the fact that there was kind of, not very intuitive ways of doing this, and I wasn't familiar with Arma 3, meant a huge headache, and I kind of had a big stress breakdown because of that. But in response, I learned I had to adapt. So episode 1 to 3 used an attempted scene-by-scene scripting. However, you guessed it, scripting out huge battles lags the hell out of Arma, because it also isn't particularly well optimized at times. So, Episode 1 used this insane, giant 2-part mission where all the units were placed and I tried to personally run through the entire thing. This was, in general, not great. Episode 1 was also where I knew I needed some original music, but that's really a whole other story. Episode 2 was the last time I tried using this approach, of trying to coordinate all these various scenes with all these specific scripting quite so precisely. Episode 2 is also where I became very curious about doing custom skins. So, by looking up the Hmcs mod, I looked for basically the only other guy who had ever worked with it to the point that maybe they could do this, and that turned out to be Cannon Fodder Mark IV, who would then go on to turn all my deranged bad skin thumbnails and caveman M777 artillery ideas into an actual reality. As for the battles themselves, the results were mostly an incredibly chaotic and mentally taxing process. If you want to imagine what it was like, take a battle from Lord of the Rings, now fire your entire special effects crew, do it all yourself. Now, instead of animating all the characters, try instead to use bad AI to play out the battle. Guys looking the wrong way, shooting too much, turning in circles, not shooting. Okay, now do that for 15 times for an entire 30 to 40 minute episode for each sequence of the battle. Wow, does that sound shit? Yes, it is. And yes, it was. This led me to understand a very key difference, and maybe one of the most important things. The difference between the movie approach and the documentary approach. The movie approach is what I had originally said. Script first, then storyboards, then dialogue, and so on. The documentary approach I adapted to instead was what I could quickly learn was far superior. With documentaries, you first write out kind of the larger pivot points of your story, but you leave it fairly open. You shoot all your footage first. Then, using rough storyboards and a general, this is kind of the battle, it should work like this, etc. From there, you then write the bulk of the script. What this lets you do is take advantage of organic moments that happen mid-story. And from a game as janky as Arma 3, you'll have a lot of those that you didn't really expect to happen. It frees you up by not having you be beholden to a script and storyboards, because suddenly your bad game AI can't match that anyways. A big example of this was the MG jamming in Episode 6. I had asked Cannon to change the ammo amount and damage on the Hmcs as well, as adding the M777, it basically caused the MG to periodically jam while shooting. This was a technical issue. But then I thought, hey, we could blame that on the hot, steamy environment, and it would fit, and I think it did in that episode. So come Episode 3, I changed my approach drastically. Individual scenes would be composed and make up the bulk of the episode, with the highlights being a much easier to coordinate base CRAM defense, and one purposefully hectic final battle climaxing nicely with Cannon's newly added smoke launchers. Moving forward, I would make use of this kind of hybrid approach, using the movie and documentary styles to compose episodes in the most manageable way. For important scenes, scripting out unit movement, and for battles, letting the action happen and writing around it instead of penning it in. Episode 4 would be a dialogue test for me. Very early on, I knew I couldn't play every part. I didn't want to, really. In fact, I still don't like that I had to do double duty as the main character and narrator. I know a lot of people think, oh, it's great as an ego thing, but really it's just because I couldn't really find anybody that I trusted to do it. As I initially also had 0 people lined up, I sort of begrudgingly started to do it. So, with the addition of Ninebreaker's inclusion as lodestone, I slowly opened up my ideas to kind of a small but doable number of side characters of the other Amber March pilots. Episode 4's pretty calm, long traveling scenes made good spaces for me to practice dialogue between them. Unsurprisingly, I made good reference of Generation Kill. Episode 4 would also mark the addition of real Ryan Gosling, whose voice acting was solid and maybe gave the best overall performance in the whole series. It was also the addition of Metals Beans as another Amber March pilot, which was also very good. Episode 5 was special as it's still the episode that I did the most movie style with, individually scripting out the movements of Amber 1 and Amber 3, kind of just moving through this flooded landscape, storyboarding all these scenes, mapping out the route around Tanoa. Very early on with ROM, I knew climate change would play a big role. The semi-flooded tropical island landscape was a perfect backdrop for me to do more one-on-one dialogue between characters. Once again, Metals Beans did a great work as Amber 3, and did a great job the whole series through, and is a good friend of mine, who combined with Ninebreaker helped me really work out writing simple characters. All in all, I think I'm still maybe most proud of this episode in a lot of ways. It really captures an atmosphere that I had initially visualized and then kind of realized. which really opened up with episode 6. For this one, I did maybe what I should have done much sooner, and what most people who play Arma 3 do. That is, getting a bunch of guys together to act out my scenes as stuntmen. The stormy, misty Southeast Asia locale had been a favorite spot of mech action since the 08 The Mess Team and Pat Lever 2's intro for me many years ago. So, despite a lot of consternation to the contrary that I should not put machines in the jungle, I put the mecha in the jungle, with Agent 0079's soft-spoken voice doing a real great SF spook character. Outside of the intro, episode 6 was a giant 2-part mission I put together for me and 4 other guys to play through. In stark contrast to episode 5, 6 is maybe the most documentary-style episode. It was a lot of fun, and it really meshed my ideas of infantry special forces escorting this giant artillery beast through the dense jungle fantastically. Where things I think finally all really came together in a huge way, pretty obviously, was episode 7. Ninebreaker, who was just in a voice role initially, and who otherwise was making the equipment for ROM and a lot of the guns and outfits for the characters, came on as the pilot of Arma 2, with Hexane coming in as the pilot of Arma 3. So, being a big fan of the attack on Torrington sequence from Stardust Memory and the opening assault of Front Mission 4, I really wanted to, at some point in the series, do a big, helicopter base attack. And now that I had people, I could do that. It took, as it was mentioned before, a lot of practice runs. We initially played out the runs during the day to get familiar with the general enemy positions. We then marked out lines of advancement along the beach to coordinate our positions, and I worked out the rough enemy, bearing, distance, engage callout system. On our first run, Ninebreaker doubted we could even pull it off, which at that point in time is a pretty fair conclusion. But by our final attempt, after 5 solid days of practice, we were cutting through it like butter. In the process, Ninebreaker, Hexane, and I might be some of the rarest people on Earth who have come the closest to becoming actual military-grade mech pilots. Well, at least in the simulations. Hexane's actual piloting skills also made him a fantastic candidate for the climactic showdown with the enemy helicopters. As helicopters inherit a lot of the real-world tank-destroyer jobs, and are really in some ways closer to mechs in function than tanks or jets ever were, I knew combat with them had to be weighty, difficult, and really show how dangerous they could be. As a final note, Episode 7 was the first inclusion of Cannon Fodder as both a mod man and now a voice actor and cameraman. Being way more familiar with Arma 3 than me, he became my main cinematographer really at times. And I would work out, shots to do as I acted them out with Hex and Nine. He would kind of come through and shoot, and it was a really good process. Working through as a kind of director-cameraman pair was kind of a highlight of this project in a big way. Making him the mech mechanic voice actor seemed only too perfect, considering his roles as a skin maker and a mod guy as well. Episode 8 was then kind of just a further maturation of all these elements coming together. A coordinated initial battle from Episode 7, an infantry escort with real human players from Episode 6, and then specific shots and scenes and dialogue from Episode 3, 4, and 5. Oh man, we had so many problems with the ATGM sequence. Missiles not tracking right, over-the-horizon missiles crashing, missiles flying into the back of mechs because they lost their track. But while the technical fuckery of Arma 3 was no better, depending on other people and working with them made it a lot more bearable for sure. The street sequence in particular was really, really fun to do, and it turned out great. My only grudge about Episode 8 is that its conflict ended up becoming real, which this is kind of a good time to mention, ironically, and let me clear it up right now. As soon as I knew I wanted to do ROM in early 2019/2020-ish, I knew I wanted to do an episode in Ukraine. I followed that war since 2014, so the timing of Russia now making that into a reality was not something I was reacting to, though in retrospect it might seem that way. Really, all the best to the Ukrainians, and I hope they, really tear the Russians a new asshole. Episode 9 then was kind of just a huge highlight chain. It was really just everything I had learned, polished as much as possible, in this big, massive finale. I had all the practical experience, all the techniques down, all the people I would need. With 1 or 2 more voice actors, it all climaxed pretty well. Now that's not to say, of course, that ROM was perfect. It was a learning process in many ways. It tested virtually all my artistic skills, minus maybe basket weaving, and metalsmithing, clay pottery. It's rough, but it was a vital first step in a lot of ways. For me, ROM was kind of my Evil Dead. It was a weird passion project, made possible by an insane coincidence of Arma 3, the Hmcs mod, and me playing way, way too much GG Sim, and also a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. In some ways, I had it much easier than the mech creators of the past. Unlike Oshi or Tomino, I could make as many mechs as I wanted, use dozens of different locations pre-made. I could dump out a huge pile of tanks, a huge pile of helicopters. I could have basically infinite items, as well, within the limits of the CPU. But I also had to create everything on my own, do almost every job needed to make it, and coordinate everyone and everything in the process. It was hard. It was really, really damn hard. If you ever see those guys, they're like, oh, I'm the director and editor and blah blah blah, and they make it sound like it's great. Don't trust them. It's a lie, or it's an insane ego trip. It's mostly just tons of work. But I felt, and I think I still feel, that it was all necessary. I can't let myself fall into the pit of just becoming a YouTube critic. As an artist, continuously pushing yourself is very vital. What is harder is the lesson is doing that in a balanced manner, which, I'm still working on that one. A lot in society screams at you to be very productive, and in contrast, very little screams at you how to do so in a healthy way. Especially in our content-pumping, rate of culture death spiral capitalist nightmare world. In the process, though, the Type-12 is no longer just another cool machine in my mind. The Type-12 became like my old skateboard, like my musical instruments. The Type-12 became an extension of me in control, in image and design. It filled my waking hours, and the images of its violence, tragedy, and heroics took up my imagination. Maybe more than anyone but Takeshi Miyagi, this machine is now a part of me and my life story. Though I didn't design you, didn't program your movements, didn't make your shape or give you forms, I have, in the way only pilots can, come to know you. Walking away isn't easy, but I think I know how Canary felt looking at the old dug room rusting in the sun. So, for everything, thank you, Type-12. You were my wings and the thunder in my hand, and now you will rest in my heart. And thus, I turn my back. There is a future elsewhere.